Want to welcome you guys back to another episode of Pistons Talk Podcast presented by FanDuel. In today's episode, what we'll be discussing is the Detroit Pistons trading deadline plans. I was reading an article this morning from The Athletic. Hunter Patterson does a very good job of covering the team. Definitely should be subscribed to his work, but we're going to be reacting to a couple snippets of his article as it does relate to the NBA trade deadline and what the Pistons might or might not do. So let's get straight into it, you guys. The first thing we're going to be talking about is the Detroit Pistons deadline plan. So it says, according to league sources, the Pistons' stance on being opportunistic opposed to aggressive remains unchanged with the trade deadline on Thursday. It appears unlikely the Pistons will make any major moves before the deadline. Rather than making calls to gauge the value of its own players, Detroit is doing its due diligence in answering incoming queries. The Pistons are young and exceeding expectations for a second straight season, so there's a desire to find a ceiling of this group without feeling obligated to shake up the core. So there's a couple of things that I want to kind of break down. The first part of the article saying at the Pistons' stance on being opportunistic opposed to being aggressive. I feel like that's the message we've been getting for like what the past 3 months. Like this organization and this front office want to improve the team without making any drastic moves to the core that they have. So the core would be like Cade Cunningham, Ron Holland, Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, right? Those would be like the core foundation pieces. They get the most playing time and have uh, made big impacts in the win column this season, right? So they want to be opportunistic. What does that mean? If there's a deal that does present itself where they can get better in an area, whether that's 3-point shooting, playmaking, more size in the front court, the Pistons will be listening to offers and try to make a trade if it makes sense for them in the long term and it doesn't cost too much, right? So they'll be opportunistic in that way. And they don't really want to shake up or make any big splashes or any big moves ahead of this deadline. So I think that's kind of been the message. It's been a very consistent message. I know it's a boring message because I know a lot of Pistons fans want to go for it because the East is wide open. But it sounds like the Pistons are just going to be very opportunistic opposed to being aggressive ahead of this deadline. The second thing that I kind of wanted to talk about that rather than making calls to gauge the value of its own players, Detroit is actually taking on calls from inquiring teams about their players. And I just want to say, like, it's been such a wild ride during this rebuild where I'm sure the Pistons front office in previous regimes were making calls to upgrade the roster opposed to, you know, taking calls on their players. So other teams around the NBA are inquiring about the Pistons players, whether, that be like lower tier bench guys like a Javante Green or a Paul Reed to, maybe some of their better players, some of their rookies that they had drafted this year, or some of the young core guys like a Jaden Ivey or a Ron Holland or whatever it may be. I think it's really cool. I got to sneeze. So I'll just sneeze real quick. Okay, I didn't want you guys to hear me sneeze on the podcast. Had to mute my mic real quick, but I think it's really cool that they're taking on calls versus making the calls. Kind of shows you what type of organization that they are starting to become. And they also kind of touch on that the Pistons are young and exceeding expectations for the second straight year. We can 100% agree with that. I mean, if you kind of look at where this organization was before JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon came in, this was an organization that was coming off a 14-win season, had just fired Troy Weaver, had just fired Monty Williams. You hire JB Bickerstaff. He triples their win total in his first season, going from 14 to 44, finishes a top 6 seed. You play the Knicks. You make it a really good series. You win your first playoff game in multiple years. Not too many people coming off of that 14-win season expected the Pistons to not only make the playoffs, but be that competitive in the playoffs first and foremost. Like a lot of people saying, like, hey, if you can make the play and that's successful, well, they did better than that. They were a top 6 seed, and they played some of their most competitive basketball that we've seen in quite some time. And kind of fast forwarding to this year, I think coming off of that playoff series against the Knicks, coming off being a 6 seed, I think a lot of Pistons fans expected this team to, continue that success. I know me personally, I thought this was a 50-win team coming into this season. Right now, they're currently at 36. They're on pace for 62. So it'll be interesting to see where they do finish. But back-to-back seasons, this group has exceeded expectations. I don't think there were too many Pistons fans thinking that the Detroit Pistons would, one, be in first place, but two, almost have a 6-game lead in the Eastern Conference. And we're already way past the halfway point. We're coming up on the NBA trade deadline, and they're 5.5 games up, uh, holding that number one seed, and they've held that number one seed for almost 3 months. Like, that's just incredible. They have completely shattered expectations. But I also understand that, like, this is obviously a weakened Eastern Conference with no Jason Tatum, no Tyrese Halliburton. I mean, the Pacers were in the NBA Finals last year. The Boston Celtics won a championship a few years ago, and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are two of the best two-way forwards in our league. But the Pistons are taking advantage of the opportunity, and they're going out and just beating everyone's ass on a night-to-night basis, and you love to see that. And kind of just wrapping this up, saying like they're trying to see what the ceiling of this group is without feeling obligated to shake up their core. And that kind of goes back to the opportunistic thing. Like, they do make trades, they're not going to try to break up any core guys that are impacting winning right now. And I think that's kind of been the message and the approach that Trajan Langdon and the Detroit Pistons have kind of just messaged through, whether it's reporters are talking to, or, previous podcasts that Trajan has been a part of, when asked about contract extensions or if they're looking to make big moves or anything like that. But before we get into the next segment of this podcast, which is going to be trade exception and Tobias Harris, the Pistons do play today, and they're going to be taking on the Denver Nuggets. Nikola Jokic is back, so it's going to be a very interesting game. Last time the Pistons played the Nuggets, it went down to the wire. Jamal Murray missed some key free throws, and kind of looking at the live lines at FanDuel right now, this was a 6-point favorite game for the Pistons last night. Now it has actually gone up to 4. So they still have the Pistons favored in this one by 2 possessions. Should be a really good game out at Little Caesars Arena tonight as the Nuggets come to town to play the Detroit Pistons, who just came off one of their most dominating wins in franchise history. They beat the Brooklyn Nets by 53 points. So it should be a very interesting game to see how Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren can challenge Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. I am so excited for tonight's game, you guys. You have no idea. That and the Knicks game this week, I'm so excited. That Knicks game is going to be so crazy. I can already see the timeline, kind of like Knicks fans and Pistons fans like talking crap to each other, and I love it, man. I love rivalries when they're back in basketball. Let's get back into the podcast. So I had mentioned trade exception and Tobias Harris. So this is what they're hearing with the trade exception. Though Detroit can use its $14.3 million trade exception ahead of the deadline, league sources indicate that the team is in no rush to do so. The Pistons have until July 7th to use it. So we have been on this podcast talking about the trade exception ad nauseum. I've been under the opinion, and it's just an opinion, obviously it's wrong now, but I thought the Pistons were going to be using their trade exception to address three-point shooting, because I feel like this team, outside of Duncan Robinson, they don't really have a consistent three-point shooter outside of him. Cade has been down this year in terms of last season. Javonte Green is good for a couple threes here and there. Jaden Ivey's shot is hit or miss sometimes, but he is still shooting a pretty good volume from three. He's just had some games where it's just not going in. And you have guys in the starting lineup like Tobias Harris isn't the most reliable three-point shooter. Jalen Duren is still kind of working on his mid-range. He doesn't shoot a whole lot of threes. We know Asar Thompson is mostly just around the basket, lob threats, and driving to the basket. I really thought, like, you have a $14 million trade exception, maybe gauge the market to see if you could possibly acquire a shooter. whether you want to have him off the bench or close lineups with Duncan and Cade. Uh, I'm really surprised that they might not actually use it ahead of this deadline, and they might just use it whether that's this offseason during the NBA draft when we do see a lot of trades happen, or right before free agency. Because if they don't use it before July 7th, then they can't use it anymore. It expires. So these are only for about a year after you make the trade. So that's interesting that they might not even use the TPE or the trade exception ahead of this deadline. Now, as it does relate to Tobias Harris, it says apart from the TPE, veteran Tobias Harris, whom coach JB Bickerstaff has routinely referred to him as a safety blanket, is on an expiring $26.6 million contract. Harris is averaging his fewest points, 13.6 in his second season, but making more than everyone on the roster except Kate Cunningham. Leak sources suggest Detroit has not engaged in discussing involving Tobias Harris. Now, this isn't too surprising, kind of given if you watch these games and you listen to these press conferences and have been following this team over the past 2 years, um, they really value Tobias Harris. Even before Trajan and JB got here, there are rumors that the Pistons were going to go after Tobias Harris because they were looking for more forward depth. They were looking for more forward help, and that's what they did. Gave him a 2-year deal. He's on the last year of a $26 million expiring contract. Doesn't surprise me that this organization or this front office isn't really looking to move off Tobias Harris. Now, obviously, we know that he's not the most consistent player, as it does kind of relate to being a 20 point per game scorer on this team. He'll have games. I know we're just talking about the Nuggets. Like the last Nuggets game, looked like freaking Carmelo Anthony in the post. He had over 22 points that game, but more often than not this season, he'll have like a 20, 25 point game performance, and the next game it's maybe like 9 or 10. But the consistency just isn't there. But I think I have grown to appreciate what he is and kind of tempered my expectations. I don't get mad if he, drops 13 points. I get excited when I see like a 20 to 30 point performance out of him, but I don't expect it every game. So my expectations have kind of been even keeled. But kind of getting back into his expiring money and the organization not wanting to really move off of him because the veteran that he is, and JB Bickerstaff's calling him a safety blanket or just like a good glue guy for this team in the starting lineup. I know Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren and multiple other players, even Ron Holland, have just kind of touched on Tobias Harris's impact in the locker room, off the court, teaching these guys how to take care of their bodies, teaching them how to be a professional, and just the wealth of knowledge that he has, being in the NBA for several years. I think there's more value for this current Pistons group right now to hold on to Tobias Harris rather than throwing him in a trade where you're trading for a guy that's on a 40 $50 million salary because the money kind of works. I think this organization just really values what he brings in the locker room. And I've also kind of had this opinion, and I've mentioned it on the podcast a couple of times. I think Tobias Harris, to me, might kind of be like their Al Horford. And I'll kind of explain if you guys have not heard me mention this before. I honestly think when you kind of look at Tobias Harris, I think he could possibly come back after his contract expires. Obviously, sign a much cheaper deal. I don't think the Pistons would give him another $50 million deal over a 2-year period. I don't think they're going to be paying him $25, $26 million. But I think he could sign a team-friendly deal, come back to Detroit, and just be that good locker room vet that the team loves, the coaches love, the organization loves, and retire a Piston. Tobias is getting up there in age. I believe he's 33. Don't know how much longer he does want to play, but if he wants to retire a Piston and the contract is somewhat team friendly, budget friendly, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think in the years coming up, he'll eventually kind of get ousted out of the starting lineup. Maybe you get a power forward. Maybe there's a player on this team right now that you think that can play power forward. I know some people have mentioned Isaiah Stewart. Maybe Stu takes a progression and just handles and more consistent mid range and 3-point shooting. maybe you got Isaiah Stewart starting and Tobias Harris coming off your bench. But just to kind of circle it back, I'm not really too surprised that this organization wants to keep Tobias Harris. I am surprised by the trade exception, though. That I was like, huh, that's interesting. Maybe the market for the players that they're trying to target with the trade exception just aren't there. We really don't know the type of players that Trajan and the Pistons are looking for currently. I don't know, but maybe the market is just really bad. I mean, outside of the Cavs trying to trade for James Harden, good lord, what could possibly go wrong there? Oh man, no, that well, I'm sure we'll probably talk about that tonight on our post game show. But want to get into the Karis LeVert stuff as well. So he was also mentioned in this article, and I think we can just be unbiased and call it down the middle. He has been a very up and down player for the Pistons, and he hasn't played since the Boston game. So I think if he misses the game tonight, it'll be like what eight straight games that he's missed with a illness. Don't really know how sick he is because saw some people take some pictures with him at a signing at the uh pro sports zone. It's called. It's kind of like a sports. I think it's like a sports what do you call it? Just like a store. It's almost like a Dick's Sporting Goods in a mall in Livonia. Long story short, I had some people tag me in pictures where he looked perfectly fine during this illness, and he was taking pictures with fans. So again, I don't really know how sick he is. It's so hard to tell as we're going through this trade deadline, like who's actually sick, who's actually injured. But they did touch on Karras in this article, and they basically said, like, if there's a deal to, make a small move and upgrade the roster, they'll look to do it. Karras is on a 2-year mid-level exception of $14 million. So it's around the $29 million contract over the this season and next season. So if they're able to kind of move off of him, I think, hey, like it didn't work out, but I still think he could be at least a serviceable backup guard for another team. Obviously, you're not gonna, swing or bat, 1,000% if you're Trajan Langdon. You do make some misses, and like this was a backup plan. Like we all know that Malik Beasley was supposed to be getting that mid-level exception. It's reported that they were going to give Malik Beasley $45 million. They're going to sign him for 3 years. Who cares was their backup plan? So, if they can move on from him, cool. If they can't, he's only on the team for one more year. It's not like the contract isn't unmovable. Maybe you can move it at the draft. Maybe you can move it at next deadline or whatever it may be. But it does look like, since he has been injured, you've been seeing more consistent playing time from Danish Jenkins, which I love to see. His two-way will be expiring in the next 2 games on the 5th, ironically, which is actually a trading deadline. So it'll be interesting to see, though, like what does happen with Karras. You've also seen more minutes from Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser in a pinch with Karras being out, but did kind of want to touch on it. Now, as it does relate to Jaden Ivey, they do have a mention of him in this article. So it says, Jaden Ivey is another Detroit player who has garnered attention in the rumor mill. He's in a contract year after not reaching an agreement on a rookie scale last offseason. The 4th-year guard broke his left fibula on New Year's Day last year and underwent arthroscopic surgery on his right knee in October. Ivey seemingly lacks the explosion and athleticism he once relied on before the broken leg, and is averaging career lows in points, assists, and rebounds, and minutes played. If a deal involving Ivey presents itself, the Pistons could explore it, but considering Ivey's dip in production and the injuries the 23-year-old has suffered, the list of suitors is likely slim. Ivey will be a restricted free agent this summer with a qualifying offer of $13.4 million. Detroit has the financial flexibility to welcome him back at any price in that range. So I think with the Jaden Ivey stuff, I've touched on it. I really don't know what his future holds in Detroit. If he's dealt at the deadline, it wouldn't surprise me. If he's not dealt, again, it wouldn't surprise me. it's clear the man is coming off a broken leg, and then he had cleanup surgery on his right knee. He's not 100%. He's not right. Like you can tell watching. Like last year, Jaden Ivey was a blur. He could blow by his defender. Right now, he's having a difficult time just getting by defenders. He's very reliant on his jump shot. And it reminds me a lot, and I know it's not the same type of player, but Blake Griffin also had an arthroscopic surgery, and when he came back, obviously Blake had way more miles on his body than Jaden Ivey does. But if we're just talking about arthroscopic surgeries, like Blake had the same leg sleeve that Jaden Ivey's wearing. Blake was really relying on his jump shot and didn't really look the same. I'm not saying that Jaden Ivey will never get back to form. He very well possibly could. It might just take him a full season just to get back into the swing of things of playing basketball. He could come back next season being more explosive and getting by players, and all that speed and burst could possibly come back. But I think it's just a wait and see approach with him. The qualifying offer, like I wouldn't like be opposed to, offering the qualifying offer if he does want to take it. And like his value is probably at his lowest point. It would probably take a reclamation project type of trade for another team to kind of like look at him and possibly offer him something like that. Like I know there was a picture of Troy Weaver that did surface. He was talking to Jaden Ivey pregame, and a lot of people were speculating that Ivey was going to be getting dealt to New Orleans, which I really don't like see that happening. Just kind of given like the guards that they just drafted in Jeremiah Fears. I think they're pretty happy with Jeremiah Fears as their point guard. But just to kind of end this Ivy segment, again, like guys is dealing with arthroscopic surgery on his knee that he had in October, and then had the rehab for a whole year with that broken fibula. It'll be interesting to see what does happen with him. I mean, does he get more minutes? I'm not entirely sure. If he's making shots and playing defense, I think JB will play him more. But when he hasn't this year, you've definitely seen JB kind of not like play him in halves. I mean, there's been games, I think during the West Coast trip, he played like a total of 7 minutes just because he missed some shots, missed some defensive assignments. So JB decided just to roll with Danish Jenkins and give him more of an extended role. But it'll be interesting to see what does happen with Jaden Ivey ahead of this trading deadline, and as it does kind of relate to a contract extension. Now, there was actually a player mentioned in this article that the Pistons were interested in, and let's read who they were interested in. This is according to league sources. The Pistons had interest in Keon Ellis before he was traded from Sacramento to Cleveland. The Kings, never quite fond of the minutes for Ellis, carved out a consistent role, though he's a career 41% three-point shooter and in the 97th percentile in steals for wings per cleaning the glass. Ellis hasn't shown yet he's a consistent scorer threat off the bench, but he's a 3-and-D guard who would have fit within Detroit's defensive scheme and could blossom with the Cavaliers. So Keon Ellis is interesting. Obviously, I think when we mention him, we're going to think about the Ron Holland incident from a couple of weeks ago where he kind of grabbed Ron's arm and he wouldn't let go. And then he tripped over JB Bickerstaff's foot and he flopped. And Ron got ejected out of the game for it. But Keon Ellis is an interesting player. I think he'll do well in Cleveland. Can shoot threes really well, plays the passing lanes, can guard 1 through 3. But it kind of shows you like the type of players that this organization is looking at. They're looking for under the radar players. They're not looking for big splashes or sexy names. They're looking just for like guys that can contribute and guys that can come in and help win basketball games. Like I think of Javonte Green, like he was a player that a lot of us during the summer are like, why did we sign Javonte Green? But he's been a mainstay in the rotation off the bench of being an energy guy out there with Ron Holland, forcing steals, causing havoc, occasionally hitting some threes for you. But I think those are the type of players that the Detroit Pistons and Trajan Langdon are looking at. It's going to be an interesting next 48 hours to see what the Detroit Pistons will do ahead of this NBA trade deadline. But I do want to wrap up this podcast. We're going to be seeing you guys later on tonight for our post-game show as the Detroit Pistons do take on the Denver Nuggets tonight. That'll probably be around 10 o'clock. We're going to be live on YouTube. If you guys do watch our live streams, if you're an audio listener and you've never caught a live stream podcast, definitely encourage you to do so. No pressure, but if you do want to check us out on a live stream podcast, you're more than welcome to do so. If not, you just want to listen to us on the audio side, completely understand. Hope you guys are staying safe, staying warm, and as always, go Pistons. Peace.